right, well, let's get into my question. Just one question, but I think it's a big one that's been on a lot of people's minds as we go into asymmetry here. Just a full disclosure, I do share these questions with the developers beforehand. That way we can get the clearest answer. They have time to think about it and they're not ambushed. Because there's going to be a lot of ambushing, naturally, in a call-in show for the rest of the show. So regardless, what can you say of the disconnect between player agency and how the community wants to conduct their war, and the dev's decision to seemingly force playstyles in the asymmetry of the factions? In other words, the potential culture developed naturally by the players being usurped by the culture that comes from being handed a specific set of tools, like a forced culture there. Has there been any thought of reworking the new vehicle system to be more modular and less narrow or niche to give the players back some of that agency?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think we've had similar discussions about this before. I think on other parts of the game, like the towns, as an example, right? It's like, why in a game where one of the goals is to make it as player driven as possible, why are the towns themselves not built by the players, right? How it's kind of like, how far can you go? And I think that for us, the goal of making it player driven and having lots of player agency is not so much of a goal in itself. Like it's not like that's the driving reason for this game to like exist, but the actual driving reason for why we want to make this game is we want it to feel as real as possible, like as much as possible that the players are feeling like in a real war. And to be specific, we try to arrive at that goal by allowing players to drive as many parts of the war as possible. So like all the weapons are made by the players. All
Right. But then wouldn't the
supplies.
asymmetry, potentially cutting you off, wouldn't the asymmetry take that away? Because, instead of someone wanting to go, hey, I would like a glass cannon in the form of an anti-tank gun on a half track. That'd be really cool. But I can't do that because I'm a colonial. Instead, I'm stuck with mortars. So I'm kind of forced down that route because my faction just is that way.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. I think if you look at it from the standpoint um, of purely player agency and player choice, you're absolutely right. It does take away a little bit of that, but it does it in the same way that we take away the ability for players to choose where their like where their logi towns are, or like why is there even a town pre-built in the first place, right? We
Mhm.
kind of have chosen our point in that spectrum of like full sandbox player like agency on one end, and on the far other end, everything's fixed. We sort of pick the point of like, we give you the canvas, right? And the canvas includes this world, this town, these factions, this lore, and then within that framework, that's how you like operate. But it's definitely a spectrum, and there's definitely pros and cons as you move along that spectrum. So certainly some of it is lost there, but I think the part that is gained is that um, you also feel it also feels more like this could have been a real thing. This could have been like an alternate history, which I think is a big driving goal of ours from the beginning. Is
Mhm.
we've always said when we made the lore, we don't make it like a fiction. Like we want it to feel like someone could have taught this lore in a history class, right? At like a history like lecture at a college. That's
Sure.
how we approach it.
Oh, for sure. And they'd probably put on Potatoes documentary. They put that on in the class. Lower the lights.
Yeah,
Let's watch this
yeah,
documentary. But I don't know. I feel like I'm feeling a disconnect here between what you're trying to reason it with, and what we're actually seeing as a result. Because again, this might have been my fault and a lot of people's individual thoughts in like just projecting what they wanted to see versus what you guys were actually trying to tell us was going to happen. But if you remember, there was a lot of talk about more of a modular system where it's like, okay, so let's say you have a base light tank frame, and then from there you can choose to put on that frame anti-tank gun, mortar, something tankette, maybe a machine gun, something like that. Again, I don't think you guys ever really confirmed that. But do you see a potential more flexibility there in how people can choose their own thing? You can still, and that's still allowing people to have the freedom to choose what weapons they want, what direction they want to fight the war in, and at the same time, even to what you were saying, you still have that history. That's still something that a country along the line at war would choose to do, like how the Germans in World War II said, "Hey, you know what? Let's just make everything big. Let's just do quality over quantity, and let's just really well trained units." And then along the line, that's what they chose. Maybe the wardens in Foxhole in War '63, maybe they can have that choice for themselves, and that maybe even gives it more history. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're getting at is a fully modular system where you can like take almost these like Lego pieces and try to
Easier said than done, technically, I understand. But
for sure. But let's just put that aside for 1 second,
Mhm.
right? Like, I think what you're saying is that kind of system, and I do think we have thought about doing a fully flexible system like that previously. I think where the current trajectory is to try to get at some of that is not necessarily a Lego system. Like you've seen a lot of games out there that do have like a Lego system,
Right.
and they end up feeling a lot more like a Minecraft type of.
Mhm.
Maybe to resolve the technical side, it ends up being more of like a Minecraft type of system,
Sure.
type of feeling. But I think to try to get at some of that, um, I think we what we can try to do is over time try to fill in enough gaps, because right now the tech tree of both sides is actually, I think that's one of the things that we're struggling with right now, is that there's just not enough stuff. Like it's
To
part of the
justify,
goal.
yeah, to justify the kind of narrowness of it.
Yeah, like one of the goals was supposed. So I think to your point, and I think to be fair to your point, I could understand where things may um, have been like seen that that's what we would have gotten.
Mhm.
And right now what we have right now maybe not like match some of that flexibility. But I think what we ultimately wanted was this feeling like you are able to make these choices, and perhaps there's like so much there that it certainly feels like, okay, in this war, like they chose to go after this, right? Like
Mhm.
one faction chose to go after this instead of that. But where we're at right now is there's, because the tech trees are not filled enough, it does feel a little bit more like at certain points, okay, you just have to get this vehicle because it's the best one, right? Like
Mhm.
this faction knows that X vehicle or Y vehicle is the one to get, and there isn't really much of a choice, and you don't really feel as much like, okay, we ended up like picking this over that, right? So
Right. And I
yeah.
think sorry, well, just I think we want to cap it too because we want to get to the calls. But I do think it's a deeper topic because it kind of gets to something even more core than that, the core to the issue, which is like how what happens in the game amongst thousands of players in a massive sandbox over hundreds and hundreds of hours, stuff that you and I will never fully comprehend just by the absolute enormity of it. Uh, but all of that far outpacing anything Matt could ever write in the lore, anything you guys could ever design in the tech tree, anything I could ever write in my stupid lore. And so it's when this is the now infamous Max comment, but when he said the how, oh yeah, colonials have an open top vehicles because they don't care as much about their lives as opposed to the wardens. And that was meme to hell, and whatever. It was funny. I know he wasn't really harping too much on it, but I think that does cut into it because because then he tried to say like, oh, it's just that's just the lore, that's just the lore. But that's kind of a disconnect between the what happens in the lore, kind of like on the other side, south of the Great March, and then the moment you go into the Great March, into the actual game space, things are a little different. So and I'm not saying that's something that can be easily rectified because again, it's just such an enormous thing. How the hell do you account for all these cultures and relationships, and how do you put that into your development? Goodness, I don't know. I'm just trying to point out that maybe, and for a lot of people, I think a lot of people are trying to funnel this that argument into mine, but just trying to make sense of it because maybe they're not
Well,
getting exactly what they want, and that's the price of freedom, right? You give them a little bit,
well,
they want all of it.
well. I mean, to your point, like I think I actually like this question as a general question in making these kinds of like games, right? It's like how
Right.
did, like it's almost like beyond like Foxhole, right? If
Yeah.
we were to sit down like right now and say, hey, let's make another game that is like Foxhole, and our goal is very similar goals. How far do you take that aspect? Is it better to um, go much further in terms of that type of like agency, but then you start having these other like trade-offs in there, right? And I think it's a very valid question to ask, if I have to be honest. And I think it's one of those things where like thinking about these making these types of games and like future games, it's definitely the kind of thing where you end up where the conversation where these discussions become a lot more like philosophical again, and we
Right.
get back into that world. And then usually what ends up happening is you go in a circle, you come back, okay, well now we got to get out of the philosophical world, and we got to sit down and actually make something, right?
Mm.
So it's very interesting to me.
Yeah. And again, that's just the power of the sandbox, power of the internet, and the power of everyone online doing something that's quite frankly never been done like this before. So we take the hits as we come across them. So anyway, in any case, that was my one big question. Usually I have a few more, but that was my big philosophical one that I wanted to get to. It's been biting at me. So, and quite a few other people. So let's get to our callers. Our first